Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. Today's guest expert is Bill Coletti. Bill is a crisis communications and reputation management expert with more than 25 years of experience managing high-stakes crises, issues management, and media relations, challenges for Fortune 500 companies, and others. He is founder of Kith, a crisis communications and reputation management firm that is at its best when working with established corporations disrupted in the age of disruption. Bill previously co-led the global risk management and crisis communications practice for Hill Knowlton Strategies and has provided senior counsel in crisis management, corporate communications, reputation defense to clients, including a bunch of names that you've heard: AT&T, Home Depot, American Express, Target, American Airlines, a whole list of people. Bill, it is so great to have you on the podcast with us today. How are you?
I'm excellent, Jake. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So thanks so much for having me.
You know, I have been very excited to get you on because the topic that you talk about, this reputation management, not just for companies, businesses, but also for individuals, is so important. And as I went through that bio, I mean, of course, there's a lot of big words, a lot of things that you're doing. Can you give us just a 30,000-foot view? What do you focus on? And then take us to who Bill is at a personal level.
Absolutely. So, we focused on three main things. We do crisis response, where we work with clients that find themselves in the crosshairs of the media or the public. So it's crisis response, number one. Crisis planning, helping people get ready and think about the inevitability of reputation issues. And then crisis training, where I actually do simulations and work with folks to actually simulate crises that have been identified, so to make sure that they've built up a reservoir of readiness and prepared. And then lastly is this notion of reputation management. And that was what the 4A's model that we've created about reputation management to talk about that. So those are the things that we do: response, training, planning, and reputation management for the long term.
Very cool. And how about you as an individual?
Sure. Live in Austin, Texas. I'm the proud father of two amazing young women. One is a recent college graduate and the other's on her way to ninth grade. We are, I sail, and so I love to sail, and just got back from a beautiful vacation down in the British Virgin Islands. I got engaged in April and going to get married in next April to an amazing, amazing woman named Debbie, and started my career in politics, then worked at a big agency, and then started our own firm about 5 years ago.
Well, very cool. Now, you've seen a lot of stuff. And as we talk through this crisis planning, crisis training, crisis response, tell me, why is this important today?
Because most individuals and companies do not spend their days in the public eye. Most people go about their business, do what they do in a very normal, rational way, dealing with customers, dealing with clients, dealing with their teams. But there are moments in time where you unexpectedly show up into the bright lights of the public. And that moment, that critical moment, has a absolute determination of your long-term success and long-term viability. And so crisis is, if you read the front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today for that matter, if you read any major newspaper, you are finding stories about companies and or individuals that find themselves in some form of crisis. And how they respond, we are quick to cast judgment on as a society. And so being ready in those crises is absolutely critical.
You know, it's interesting. Yesterday, I was on the podcast with another guest, and he was talking about a video that he shot, let's say 15 years ago when he was getting engaged. He's a twin. He got engaged to a twin and shot the video, and the thing went viral. And as companies, we often talk about this idea of things going viral in a positive sense. It's like we want the attention. We want people to come to our website. We want our businesses to grow and have that attention. But today we're talking about kind of the opposite side of that, and that is when things negatively go viral. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be viral in the context of social media, or it can, and then therefore that then leads to mainstream press attention, or it can start with mainstream press attention. But absolutely, I think that social, all aspects of social media has significantly changed what we do. But that typically is the catalyst for many of these challenges that we're talking about.
Now, this may or may not be true, Bill, and it's something that I heard a long time ago, and that was this idea, maybe back in the 80s, maybe before that any publicity, good or bad, anytime the spotlight was shining on you, was positive in the fact that people were talking about you, people knew you. I think that's kind of changing. I think over the past 20, 30 years, we've seen a difference. But you being in the business, have you heard that kind of refrain before, and then where are we at today?
Yeah, I think that has changed. And I think that was, the context where that quote first came about was typically, criminal defense attorneys, and where, criminal defense attorneys representing really horrific criminals, and they got in the newspaper and I had a number of friends that actually do criminal defense, and they were representing terrible, terrible people. And they knew that was wonderful business development because terrible person A is the business, the referral mechanism for terrible person B. So it really worked in that context. But now I don't think that's the case. I think when individuals get caught up into this social media maelstrom, is that while we all have a short attention span, is that Google and search indexing lives forever. And so people can see that, and we're all basing our opinions about what we read on TripAdvisor, or what we read on Yelp, or what we read just in Google, the top page of Google. So yeah, it is absolutely changing. I think there are some industries, some businesses where, criminal defense attorneys, where it might be relevant is that you want a junkyard dog. You want somebody who's really that tough. But I think for most of us that are not in those types of businesses, I think you're absolutely correct that the world has changed, and that we all need to be much more relevant, much more sensitive, and know what to do during those critical moments.
And you talk about this idea of having a short attention span, and it seems like because there's such a vast amount of information coming at us, through all of the channels, whether it's television, whether it's radio, whether it's the internet, all of the channels that are constantly bringing us information, it seems like we do, as a society, tend to have a short attention span as far as being outraged by something. Like somebody can outrage us today and maybe for the next 3, 4, 5 days, and then all of a sudden it seems to fall off. But then what you're saying is through the longevity of the internet, that reputation is going to stay with us for a long time. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a long tail. And so if you search an individual's name that's got caught up in this, they live on the internet. Now, there are strategies. There's both white hat strategies and black hat strategies to try to sort of suppress those search results. But that's kind of a search engine optimization art, which is not really relevant to what I do. But I think while people do have short attention spans, while people are incredibly forgiving, is that if you Google search and you did something and you're looking to try to get a job and you're a mid-career professional and you're making a transition to your next thing or next opportunity or next rung on the management, anybody doing good due diligence is going to search Jake and going to see some things, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case may be, that you may not want everybody to know about. Yeah, exactly. That you don't want people to know about. And so, it is relevant, but we are forgiving. And so I think while we all make mistakes, there are individuals, we do things that we wish we hadn't done. And I really believe in the humanity of most individuals. So it's critical that you have a plausible story or a plausible narrative, and that you've apologized for what you've done, because we are a very forgiving society.
Yeah, I think society is very forgiving, but I want to ask you about this. What seems to be happening is this kind of knee-jerk reaction that companies, especially large companies, very visual public companies have when a member of their team makes a mistake. And it seems like, every day you can open up any newspaper and see an individual that was fired or is put on administrative leave while they're investigating. And when you read about kind of the actions that they did, it doesn't necessarily look intentional. Especially, I've seen recently some people that were let go from news agencies that, get on a podcast or they get on a talk show or something like that, and they make a comment in the heat of the moment that ends up derailing an entire career. And speak to me a little bit from both the company side of you for managing that crisis where they have an employee that's speaking a little out of turn, but also from an individual standpoint where that individual maybe didn't necessarily mean it that way, but it came across, it was portrayed that way through just the circumstances and the sound bit society that we live in.
Yeah. So I'll take it from the personal side first. I hear you, but we still have to be careful, and we live in a political correct society, but it is the world that we live in. If you want to buck that trend, go for it. But there is room for grace, and there's also accountability. Is that if you do say stuff like that, and you're, maybe it's in the heat of the moment, maybe it's not. People should be careful and they should be thoughtful because mics are always on and situations are always live, and so being careful is important. So I think individuals should think about those things. And if they do it, and it is in this heat of the moment, to, if necessary, apologize, or if necessary, own it. Is that I meant to say that. That's exactly what I believe. That's exactly what I feel that's there. I think in a corporate context, you're right. A lot of companies are fast to manage. Back to what we were talking about before, that things move really, really fast on social, and you don't want to be the company that kind of fiddled while Rome burned, and people are sort of really taking pot shots at your company, taking pot shots at your executive leadership. So there is a pretty standard, easy corporate response is administrative leave. I'm going to go spend more time with my family, to get rid of people. That's a pretty safe corporate response as opposed to doubling down on somebody and defending them. It's unfortunate sometimes, but I've often coached and counseled clients that, the easiest and best way to get out of the paper and get out of the headlines or social media in this context, is to just simply separate yourself from that person. It's unfair and it's not necessarily right, but it's certainly within the best interest of the organization, which is bigger than any individual.
Yeah, and what do you think about this idea of first mover disadvantage? It almost seems like when things start coming out, if you're the first person to get either caught with your hand in the cookie jar or, get a little egg on your face, then you're the one who takes the biggest fall, and those who come behind you, the outrage isn't quite as strong as it is for that first mover, what I would call disadvantage.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think if we look at the Me Too movement and the challenges that we are having with frankly, men behaving badly relative to women, is that I think there was greater outrage in that first mover disadvantage. I think now we hear about it, and I think unfortunately our president has sadly normalized some of these horrible behaviors. But we also, in a less personal context, we feel it in data breach. And so when you first heard of data breaches and you got a letter from your credit card company or a retailer, you were like, oh my gosh, everybody knows everything about me 5 or 6 years ago. Now you get those letters and you're like, okay, that's fine. I get it. And you really have become desensitized to it. So you're absolutely right. There is that first mover disadvantage. We get outraged by things initially, but once we hear about them more often, we get a little desensitized to that. And I think for the work that I do is being tuned into those trends and tuned into that, where are we in that life cycle of a topic? And I think it sort of directly impacts the response.
Yeah, and you as the father of two daughters and myself as the father of two daughters, we are outraged by it. And we need to continue to be. But yeah, that's a great conversation. Let's dive into a little bit of how we as listeners can manage our reputation. And maybe we could take some stories. Let's talk, we don't need to share names or specific experiences, but let's talk about an experience that somebody that you worked with went through and how that could relate back to some of the listeners of this episode.
Sure. I'll if, with your permission, I will kind of sort of hybrid a couple of different stories together, just so that we're not talking about any particular individual, but I'll give you sort of three sort of starting places for that. So, one is a high net worth individual, ran a very successful financial services firm, was going through a divorce and made a mistake of soliciting a prostitute and found somebody on one of the back pages of one of those magazines you pick up at the grocery store, and called the phone number, and the phone number was a sting of law enforcement, and got arrested on Friday night of Labor Day weekend. And come Tuesday morning, the media found out about it after the local law enforcement had posted it. Or a lawyer that was running a very successful law firm and was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, where there was a child pornography raid at a hotel that he happened to be at, and he got swept up into this really, really very horrible situation. Or a young man who was caught on video saying things that he shouldn't have been saying, and the maelstrom that happened after that, because it absolutely, to your point, absolutely went viral. And so I think these are all examples of men, but I've got plenty of examples of women that we've worked with that have said or done things in a customer service context, or said or done things in their professional business that people really misinterpreted. And so those reputations, in each case, their hopes and dreams. The financial services firm lost $2 billion in assets and a significant number of clients because of that incident on Labor Day. The lawyer lost his job, lost his clients, lost his career. He ran his own law firm, but his partners kicked him out. And then the third one, gentleman, had his choice of colleges, but his choice of colleges somewhat got limited after that video came out. And so significant change happens to people, but there is a path to redemption. All three of them have redeemed themselves and are now not where they thought they would be, but have gone on a journey of certainly personal reflection, but they've gone on a journey to do new, different, and better things than they might have done without those incidences. So let me stop there so you see kind of your reaction to those and sort of directionally where you want me to expand on that.
Yeah, directionally, I would love to hear now, okay, how did they take that first step, and what was that first step? Because I agree with you. We often make, and maybe none of my mistakes, hopefully none of my mistakes are ever to the magnitude of some of the things that we're talking about, although I think some of our listeners can relate to example number 3, where we may have said something, especially at a younger age. I mean, I'm imagining, a high school student, an athlete, a popular person that's trying to be funny or something like that, and said some stuff that may or may not at the time have been his true beliefs. But I want to take it now from these 3 individuals, which relate very well to this conversation. And what do we take as the next step, the first step moving away from this?
There's 2 axes to think about it. There is their personal growth and development outside of the bright lights of the media. So that's kind of first and foremost. Then there's second, which is the public component of this. And a lot of what we do for the clients that we work with in this personal context, very, very different from the corporate work that we do, is that, we play somewhat of a ministerial role where we work with people, and it is very much that of a counselor, helping and working with them on the individual and personal side. But the first step is a recognition of what was done and the public's perception, and what is the journey to apology, what is the journey to redemption. So that's the first step. The second first step, if you will, is to figure out how to manage the public and how to make some sort of comment publicly about that. And even look at a situation, Varsity Blues. We had a number of people got caught up into this scandal related to college admissions. That was there. Some high profile individuals, some movie stars, fashion designers, guys that run big law firms, hedge funds, what have you, trying to get their kids into college. A lot of those folks, went underground and didn't really say anything. And that's a completely legitimate strategy that's there. But some of them actually came out and apologized and are trying to move forward in those situations. So the first step is really to be reflective and figure out what your role was in the situation. The second first step is to figure out what you want to say publicly. I often recommend an apology, that we simply have to apologize, and then we also then have to fix it. We have to make amends, or we have to make redemption on what needs to be done moving forward. So I think those are kind of the three key points: personal, apologize, and then articulate a path forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting as we talk about this Varsity Blues challenge that's going on. One of the things is you got to be a little bit careful when you come out and make a public apology, because this is also a criminal matter that they're being investigated, and they go on the record apologizing. That can be used against them later on in the criminal suit. So there is kind of this balance. And I know we were talking specifically Varsity Blues, but what about reputation management, in that the legal system moves an awful lot slower than the social public eye system? And so being careful about what you say and how you say it as managing your reputation, while also making sure that you're not pinning yourself into a corner with whatever criminal defense or legal defense strategy that you're going to need in the future.
Yeah, it's a terrific question, and some of the great debates that I have professionally are with attorneys, and I have immense respect for attorneys in the legal profession that we work with, whether it be general counsels at a corporation or, as you mentioned, criminal defense attorneys in that context. Is that you're absolutely right. It has been my experience that there's very little shades of gray in the public context. The three examples that I gave you, and then the Varsity Blues examples that are there, it simply happened. I mean, all four of those instances, Varsity Blues and there's three others that I referenced, it happened. And to think that through some sort of magic jujitsu in the courtroom, we're going to convince people that it didn't, is the stuff of O.J. Simpson and the stuff of fantasy. And so I often believe that simply apologizing and being human and humane is a defense and is a strong place to be. Very few of these situations ultimately go to trial. They're all probably there's settlements and people just sort of agree to punishment without it ultimately going to trial, because there's very, very rarely shades of gray. So I hear you. There is. You don't, first thing in what I do is do no harm. You want to stop the bleeding. You don't want to do any additional, additional damage to individuals. But I've always thought that apologizing works well with a jury. I think apologizing works well with society, and it's also kind of good for your soul in that context.
Yeah, and that goes back to kind of the first step of the first step, and that is obviously you recognize the challenge there, but then you as a company, you focus on the individual and working on the self and helping them understand what reputation that they have currently, what this did to it, and then where they need to go, where they want to be, where their destination is. One of the things we often talk about with our coaching clients, and that is looking out into the future and seeing your designed future, where you want to end up. And looking from today, maybe things are going down, maybe things are struggling, but where do you want to be and what are the action steps that you need to take starting today, whether it's apology, how to make amends, what amends is appropriate to, the action, the reputational tarnishment that you have, what action steps need to be taken to move all the way through. And so I love this idea. Now, how about this idea that I would imagine that you guys are not necessarily therapists or counselors, you're more strategists and consultants. So how do you walk that line between working with somebody on a therapist standpoint versus just a consultant standpoint?
Yeah, it first comes with recognition of knowing what I'm good at. And I get put in those situations, and I can give opinions, and I can be empathetic, and I can be a sounding board. But I would never ever estimate that I'm a trained therapist in that context. And I often encourage people to get that kind of help because it's critical. You're right. Our role is much more of a strategist related to sort of public and reputational issues that are there. But as I've matured and evolved and done my own work and my own journey, is that I can share perspectives on this because of the pattern recognition, is that I've seen a lot of these things. I've seen how they play out, and I can share with clients that here's the pattern, here's how this is going to play itself out. And so it is helpful in the same way that a therapist is helpful. But I try to be really cautious about not wading into too deep into areas that are not my areas of expertise.
Well, that's excellent. Now, one of my big takeaways from this episode, and one of the things that I hope the listeners are taking away from this episode, is it's better to start with an intentional strategy of not making these types of mistakes and really watching the decisions that you make, particularly in a business context, particularly how your personal life can impact your business, your colleagues, and the people that you work with. So the big takeaway, I hope that none of the listeners need to go through this crisis management type of situation, but I hope that they took away from this some ideas. The second thing I hope that they take away, and that is the theme of this podcast overall, and that is everything is figure outable. So if you've made mistakes, if you've said something online, if you've done something within your business that needs to be fixed, that needs to be changed, there is a process. There's some opportunities for you to grow out of it, and take confidence in knowing that the three individuals that Bill talked about all came out on the other end, maybe not in the direction that they thought they were going to end up in the beginning, but they're all moving forward. They're all having success in their own ways. And so, Bill, this is a tremendous conversation. I wish that we had hours and hours to talk about it and tell stories, but alas, we're running to the end of the episode, and it's time now for Learning from Leaders. Are you ready?
You bet.
All right, our first question then, is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table? What are you reading these days?
Grace by John Baldoni.
Yeah, and what do you think about it?
Baldoni is an amazing executive coach and leader and thinker about the way we operate in business. In this book, Grace, really, he talks about it in the way you and I understand grace, but he also talks about it in an acronym, and the meaning of each one. Talks about generosity, respect, and it's really amazing. An amazing book, very transformational and very, very timely in the world that we live right now, that we all could stand to have a little bit more grace in society.
Yeah, and very relevant to what you're doing with your company.
Yeah, I don't think he writes about a couple of different crisis examples in the book, and so I read it. I got into it for a different reason, but you're right. I have seen some remarkable parallels, and I'm writing a blog post about sort of the parallels between what he wrote and the way I think.
Very cool. All right, second question: your leadership superpower.
I love the way you sort of manifest these superpowers that they're. I love that concept of adaptability. I think that's terrific. I try to be inspirational, but I really think it's the notion of being adaptable in different situations.
Yeah, and actually that's my personal superpower is adaptability. So I have a soft spot in my heart for adaptable leaders as well. And I think while all 5 leadership superpowers are important and necessary, and we all have aspects of each, a soft spot in my heart for the adaptable leader.
Well, I'm glad to have a kindred soul in that, so thanks.
All right, a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra, something you live by.
If not now, when? If not now, then when?
If not now, then when? I mean, life is so short. Opportunity is fleeting. If not now, then when? Do it today and have that great experience. I love this one, Bill, and it's going up on my quote board that I have.
That's terrific. Yep, good stuff.
All right, our last question then is the book that you most often gift or refer to friends, colleagues, and family.
Yeah, this is a challenge. So I've got my own book. I gift that a lot to clients and prospects that I'm working with. So I guess by volume, that's the one that I gift most. But the one that I probably gift with the greatest intention is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I think that's the one I gift more than anything because I just think it is a very, very thoughtful book that gets at a lot of great thinking, and there's a lot of foundational work. So Simon Sinek's Start With Why.
Yeah, and Start With Why has been on our bookshelf for a number of years. It was one of the very first Modern Leadership Book Club books that we analyzed. I love it. It's actually, coincidentally, Bill, the second in a row podcast that was recommended. But we didn't know about your book. So tell us a little bit about that title and where we can pick it up.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Critical Moments, the New Mindset for Reputation Management. And basically what it is that it creates for the first time a model that corporations and individuals, but that corporations can use to actually go on a journey of reputation management. And it talks about the 4 A's of reputation management and the journey that you go on and actually to do that. And the genesis of the book was a conversation I had with a CEO about quantifying or explaining how do we actually do reputation. And his parallel he drew was every other discipline within the corporation has a model or a framework. And there was no model or framework for reputation management. So based on my experience, I created one. That's the 4 A's. And each A can be assigned budget, can be assigned a leader, and can be assigned, KPIs or key performance indicators for each one of them so that corporations can actually begin the journey of reputation management.
Yeah, and if we send the listeners over to your website, there's a pyramid on there that they can learn about the A's and kind of see that. But where can they pick up a copy of the book?
Amazon is the easiest and best place to do it. You can drop me a note on our website. Happy to share it with people. Our publisher's been real generous and letting us share it with some folks that reach out. So either one, go to the kith.co website. You can reach us through there, reach us on social. I love LinkedIn. It's Bill Coletti on LinkedIn. And then, but Amazon's kind of the easiest and the one with the least friction.
Yeah, and we'll link it up on the show notes so they can have one shop. They can go there, see the book, see the quote, see the leadership superpower, learn more about you, and connect all at one space. Bill, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. I really think that this topic, while we have never covered it in our 250 episodes of the podcast, is so valuable, and I appreciate you coming on, and you're just an absolute expert. Thank you for being this week's Modern Leadership guest.
Well, Jake, thank you very much for having me. And very importantly, thank you for what you do. I know a lot of people find value in you sharing on this podcast, and I know it's a labor of love. And so I just want to thank you for what you do.
All right, my friends, what did you think of that? A big thanks, shout out to Bill for being this week's guest expert. Had so much fun talking with him. What a genuinely nice guy, very intelligent, and knows his stuff so well. I mean, the topic that we just talked about, he knows it inside and out. I love the way he presented it. I love the way he sounded. Just a great guest for our podcast, the type of guest that we're looking for, the type of people that I love to sit down with and have a great morning chat with. Of course, everything that we talked about on this episode of the podcast can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML145, episode 145. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life, and of course, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.